Thank you, members. I appreciate your flexibility. Just needed a few extra minutes with the floor session today, so we're starting a few minutes behind schedule, but we are pleased to have the department and the commissioner here with us today. All right, so Commissioner, with your permission, sometimes we have to be a little flexible. I can't actually put the bill before us until we have a quorum, which we don't have yet.
Okay.
But if you want to go ahead and start testimony and your presentation, as soon as we have a quorum, we'll interrupt and we'll do the formalities of bringing the governor's bill before the committee for consideration. All right?
That'd be great. Madam Chair, thank you for inviting us here and to discuss the governor's budget bill. And I brought my team with me. I have Adojuni here who will walk through the bill once we have a quorum. Bobby Burnham, who can answer some of the more detailed technical questions about our early learning proposals. Tom Melcher, who is our Director of Education Finance, and you're very familiar with his many years of great service to this state. Dennis Olson, who is our Indian Ed Director and can answer some questions about our proposals regarding Indian education. I also want to thank you, Madam Chair, for convening a hearing next week on the state of Indian education in Minnesota. I think this is a very compelling, it will be a very compelling hearing, and you'll be able to hear directly from some of our tribal leaders across the state. Wei Nguyen, who is Assistant Commissioner and works with us in the agency around putting together our bill and proposal, and then Charlene Bryan, our Chief of Staff. So we have a big team. We do everything by team at the department, and really excited to talk with you a little bit about our budget priorities. I've already been here once to describe some of the overview. This is the budget walkthrough portion of it, and my comments will be brief. But I also want to wait for us to get a quorum, so I can take questions from you as well. My comments are generally that we still are continuing to build a strong foundation in Minnesota and to begin to right the ship, I like to say, and get into fiscal stability for our districts. That's why you see on our budget proposal, still continuing to fund on the per pupil formula 1% additional funding for districts as we continue to give them good, sound fiscal resources in order to meet the really high expectations that we are demanding of our school districts now. And then also continued on support with our 7-point plan for better schools, with continuing our support with early literacy and our partnership with the Reading Corps. We have some new evidence, and I'm sure they'll be presenting that if they have not already, some of their evaluation and their focus on the early grades especially. And our proposal asks them to focus the new dollars that we're proposing on the early grades so we can ensure all students are reading well by 3rd grade, which has been a huge focus of ours. Also, in terms of closing achievement gaps, we are targeting funding to the students we believe that need it most by increasing funding in schools to pre-K, and also some reforms within our scholarship program, and I'll speak to those briefly in just a moment.
Commissioner, we do have a quorum now.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, we'll just take a minute and formally get the bill before us. And after we do the minutes, thank you for the reminder. All right, so Representative Hertas, would you like to move approval of the minutes from the February 17th meeting?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I will move the minutes.
All right, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, minutes are adopted, thank you. And then with that, I would like to formally move House File 844, which is, again, the governor's budget proposal for education, to be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means with the intent that we currently will lay it over for further consideration at a later date. And there is also an author's amendment to the bill, and this is to get it in the preferred form that the administration would like. And so I would also move the author's amendment. It's A15-0045, which is also in your packets. And any discussion to the amendment? Representative Murphy.
What was the 45?
Yes, and it should be just one amendment in your packet, and again, this is to get the governor's bill in the shape that they would like. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the amendment is adopted. All right, so we have House File 844 in the shape that the administration would like, and thank you very much for your suspending for a moment, Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Madam Chair, thank you, and new members, thank you for having me today. I was talking just briefly about the 7-point plan and our investments over the past 4 years to build a strong foundation and to close achievement gaps. And I presented some of that data and results of where we were in the last time that I presented to this committee. I would like to highlight just a few things in this bill that are of importance to us in continuing that work moving forward. I talked about the general ed investment already of 1% to keep schools whole and to continue to put them on sound financial footing, as well as our investment in third grade literacy in partnership with the Reading Corps. You'll see also that we put a strong focus on early learning. This is starting to build within our schools, 4-year-old programs, as well as some reforms within our scholarship program. The first I'll talk about is our pre-K proposal to begin to scale up in our elementary schools and have a pre-K through grade 3 learning continuum. And actually, it's age 3 to grade 3, but this would add the 4-year-old component within our schools. As many of you have probably read, nationally, we have, for the first time, have over 50% of our public schools, more than 50% of our public schools have a majority of their students in poverty and or just below the poverty line. And in Minnesota, it's about 38%. I believe in order to have available pre-K to our schools, we will need to start to scale early learning available to all of the children in Minnesota, 4-year-olds. We will need to begin to scale within our schools and target those services for our students that need it the most, which is our poor kids. Also, there's significant research in the literature about any school that reaches over 40% poverty and how that concentrated poverty has an impact on learning for the entire school. So this is an attempt to try to close those gaps earlier, have schools enter into the marketplace and early learning, as well as scale up our early learning efforts across the entire state, where pre-K may not be available right now to some families. Within our scholarship program, we are proposing that the scholarships be available from birth to 3 instead of just 3 and 4-year-olds. This would expand earlier. The research is also clear. The earlier you start, the better results that you get, especially for disadvantaged children. And we would also look at eliminating the Pathway 2 option if we did the school-based scaling up option as a way to further provide more scholarships for the parent choice component, which would essentially double the scholarships in the private market space. So those are the proposals with the pre-K. We also are proposing to eliminate the current Head Start wait list. We believe that this could help about 2,500 families and children. We are investing in Help Me Grow, which is a network of service providers and provides support to families and about where to get childcare and other services for children, especially children who have special needs. Then we are looking at some very targeted strategies for closing the achievement gap. Those are increasing the funding for our EL program from 6 to 7 years. The research is clear that students need 7 years in which to master English. So we, in 2013, added the year from 5 to 6, and we'd like to add to 7, as well as some work with Indian education. I was briefly commenting before the quorum about the state of Indian education hearing for next week. I'm really anxious to talk more about that, and our current proposal with the Success for the Future grants and getting those out to double the amount of schools that have them now. And then we have some new data showing that our positive behavior and intervention system that we put in our schools is really seeming to bring down suspension rates by about 25% overall. And we have the data, and we can make sure that we give that to you. So we see suspension rates going down, referrals going down, prone restraints going down. in those schools that actually are implementing this PBIS program, Positive Behavior Intervention Systems. And we think by scaling it out to 600 more schools, we could see even more dramatic decreases in suspensions, which is more time in school for young kids. And then, of course, we've talked many times to you about the regional centers of excellence, providing support to many of our rural schools, some of our suburban schools, to give them the capacity that they haven't really been able to afford for many years with professional development, district curriculum directors, standards implementation, professional practice and teaching methodologies to really do some significant interventions within the classroom and on-site coaching that happens and needs assessments that happen within our regional centers of excellence. And so that's the crux of our budget, and what we are really trying to attempt to do is to focus and target on the achievement gap, on the strategies that we believe are research-based, that we've really been seeing results with over the past 4 years and can demonstrate results. And I shared some of that results information with you on the last time I presented. And we thank you very much for considering these priorities that the governor has set out, and we can take you through the bill, and Adosh will take you through the bill line by line, and I'll stay up here for questions that you would have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate that. All right, Adosh, if you'd like to introduce yourself for the record, please do so, and we welcome your testimony.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Adosh Uni. I am the Director of Government Relations at the Minnesota Department of Education. Commissioner, thank you for the introduction. Members of the committee, if you'd follow along from either from the House Research page or from the walkthrough document that the committee has provided you that the department has created, we can go through the Bill 844 section by section. Article 1, General Education. Section 1 establishes that districts offering pre-kindergarten programs must include 850 hours of instruction for the school year and at least 200 hours for the summer, and that would be effective in fiscal year 2017 and later. In Section 2, it adjusts the per pupil allowance amount for the alternative teacher compensation or QComp program in future years due to the impact of the universal pre-kindergarten program proposed by the governor. That's $260 per pupil through fiscal year 17, then $251 in fiscal year 18, and $249 per pupil in fiscal 19 and thereafter. In Section 3, it establishes the governor's proposed 4-year-old universal pre-K program, which is voluntary for districts to offer. To meet the state requirements, programs must include 14 components, covering areas like high-quality instruction and alignment of curriculum, assessments, instruction to state standards and guidelines, measurements of children's skills, child-staff ratios, individualized learning plans, licensed teachers, comparable teacher salaries to K through 12 teachers in the area, professional development for school-based, community-based providers, community collaboration and parent engagement, coordination with programs and services to help all students and populations, and inclusion of children with disabilities, and a plan for mixed delivery system that may include partnerships with outside providers that comply with the state requirements under this program. The implementation strategy has to be included in the district's World's Best Workforce Plan. Districts receiving pre-kindergarten funding have to have 25% of teachers licensed or with special permission by fiscal year 17, 50% by 18, 75% by 19, and 100% by fiscal year 2020 and thereafter. To participate, the child must not be in kindergarten and has to be 4 years old on September 1st. That is one of the changes from the amendment. It just clarified the language there to make sure it conformed with the intent. And the child had to have completed early childhood screening within 45 days of enrollment and has to show documentation of required immunizations. In Section 4, it just clarifies that English learners also includes pre-kindergarten pupils, and that a pupil who is an English learner can generate English learner revenue, increases that from 6 years to 7 years, effective fiscal year 16. Section 5 establishes that state-compliant pre-kindergarten program pupils will generate 0.5 pupil units. Section 6 increases the formula allowance by $58 in fiscal year 16 from $5,831 to $5,889, and by another $59 in fiscal year 17 to $5,948. Section 7 is a technical correction. It's increasing the state share of operating capital revenue and lowering the operating capital levy to offset the increases in other levies resulting from some of the governor's other recommendations, primarily the pre-K proposal. And so that this would create a no net increase in total school levies under the governor's proposal. Section 8 is the appropriations section. That is, over the biennium, the general funding increases include $174 million for the formula increase, $109 million for the pre-kindergarten program, just under $8 million for EL services, most of that going for increasing it from 6 to 7 years. And then there are appropriations linked to the formula increase that would increase aids, non-public aid and non-public transportation, people transportation. Article 2, Educational Excellence. Section 1 establishes the priority placement of reading corps members, or those teachers in pre-kindergarten through first grade programs in focus or priority schools or federal school improvement grant recipients. Section 2 is the appropriation changes. That's $4.522 million increase over the base for Success for the Future program over the biennium. $10 million increase for reading corps over base over the biennium. And then an increase to charter school building lease aid and achievement and integration aid due to linkage with the governor's pre-kindergarten proposal. Article 3 on special education. This is another technical fix of an unintended change from 2014 in section 1. The word excluding, which you see underlined there, got dropped inadvertently last year when there were changes in 2 separate bills that were merged. The items after where excluding is inserted are components of general education revenue that have long been excluded in calculating special ed excess cost aid. So the language as written without this addition would double count these revenues instead of including them. Section 2 appropriation changes. There's minor savings in special education funds. There's $4.6 million increase over base to the Positive Behavioral and Interventions Supports Program, PBIS, over the biennium. Article 4, Facilities and Technology. Section 1, just the appropriation changes. Minor increase to deferred maintenance equalization, which is linked to the pre-kindergarten proposal. In Article 5, Nutrition and Accounting, Section 1 fully pays for school breakfast for those in pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade. Reimbursement can only happen for claims submitted no later than 60 days following the last day of the full month covered by the claim. Sections 2 and 3 remove statutory reference to school readiness aid. Section 4 are the appropriation changes. It's the increase to school lunch and food storage linked with the kindergarten program. $28.1 million to increase to the base to school breakfast to fully fund for students pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade. Article 6, libraries, there are no changes. Article 7, early childhood education. Section 1 is districts no longer submit copies of contracts with outside early childhood providers to the commissioner. This is linked with the pre-kindergarten proposal. Section 2 changes the kindergarten readiness assessment so that MDE provide districts with a menu of measurement instruments that align to the state early childhood indicators, progress in kindergarten standards based on the kindergarten readiness study and meeting world's best workforce goal of measuring school readiness. Section 3 expands eligibility for early learning scholarships to ages 0 to 5 from 3 and 4-year-olds. Recipients must not be enrolled in a state-funded pre-kindergarten program, and this is effective fiscal year 17. Section 4 establishes the Help Me Grow program under MDE in collaboration with MDH and DHS, and this is affiliated with the national program. It's a resource and referral system for children prenatal to 8 and their families, facilitates collaboration between providers and families, providing healthcare outreach, tools for identification of behavioral and health problems and developmental problems, and access to community-based services. The program will provide community outreach and a resource directory that includes medical care providers, early childhood education care programs, developmental disabilities assessment and interventions, mental health services, etc. The program acts as a centralized resource of information for parents and professionals, and the program will collect data to understand the ongoing system and identify gaps and barriers in service, and MDE will annually review the outcomes of the program and their alignment with early childhood goals. Section 5 is the appropriation changes. It eliminates the funding for school readiness program in fiscal year 17, and that shifts the funding to the governor's pre-kindergarten program proposal. An increase to early childhood and family education linked to the formula allowance increase. $19.44 million in fiscal year 17 to eliminate the Head Start waiting list. $2 million each over the biennium to Northside Achievement Zone and St. Paul Promise neighborhoods. $2 million to Help Me Grow program. This is actually in Article 10. That was a drafting error on my part. Article 8, prevention, no changes. Article 9, self-sufficiency and lifelong learning, no changes. Then Article 10, state agencies. The appropriations to MDE, $818,000 operating adjustment to MDE. $6 million increase to the regional centers of excellence over the biennium. $2 million. Pardon me. Having some trouble with my iPad. $200,000 increase to the Board of Teaching over the biennium. $9,000 operating adjustment to the Board of School Administrators. And then in Section 2, it's an appropriations to the Minnesota State Academies. It's a $546,000 operating adjustment. Finally, Section 3, the appropriations to the Perpich Center for Arts Education, $299,000 operating adjustment, and $1 million for facility and instructional improvements over the biennium. And that concludes the budget bill walkthrough.
Thank you, Mr. Uni. We appreciate that. I do have a couple of people on the list. Should we ask questions now, or are you prepared? Are you having presentations from some of your other staff people?
No, we're ready for questions. now,
Okay,
Madam.
very well. Representative Seltzer, I have you first on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Nadosh, for presenting this great budget. I do have a question about the pre-K costs. First of all, the information that you presented that a greater and greater percentage every year of the children of our young families are in poverty. And so by having a universal pre-K, we will be providing those mixed income classes that show the best outcomes. But as a former school board member, I see that districts are required to cover 50% of the costs. And I know there are some other funding streams that will go into that, but I'm wondering if you could flesh that out just a little bit. The 1% and 1% is wonderful, but that really doesn't cover the inflationary costs that schools experience every year. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work for school districts that are a little bit strapped for operating capital.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, Representative Seltzer, it's a really good question, and one that I went back and kind of looked at the health of school districts and where they were at. So there's a couple of aspects of it. One is that we don't expect everybody will be able to go into it this year, so we're scaling it over multiple biennium. That's why it's so different than the Senate proposal and why it comes in at $109 million, because we anticipate about 50% of districts will be able to participate. This is because many of them already have some sort of preschool program, either every other day or 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and options, and that's fee-based, that they are able to cover that, or they've passed referenda, or they've found money within their general fund to cover it. So we believe that there are some districts already doing pre-K, and this would help them to do it as a 1.0. And most of the districts that are doing it are targeting at some of their schools, not all of their schools. Also, we went back and looked at some of our districts' fund balance and to see would they be able to, kind of cover some of the startup costs that go along with it. And we do have about 177 districts that have over 30% fund balance. Of course, you want to be careful with that because they're just building that back after many years of having some financial stress and difficulty. But our school districts are finally, at least in their fund balance and reserve, seeming to be fairly solid to be able to absorb some of these costs if they should choose to do that. I do expect that some of the other funding systems, like compensatory, would help in that second year, given it's a year behind in the compensatory funding, and some other additional title funding that can be used. And now with the reforms we did with integration aid, also being able to use integration aid in which to support a pre-K program. So I think in a sense, it sort of targets at those schools that are able to do it because they have additional resources in which to help kids with poverty. So we're hopeful that about 50% of the districts would be able to opt in right away, and then we would scale it over the biennium. Also, it's important to note that it is voluntary. It's not a mandate that school districts do it, and it's also voluntary for parents.
Representative Seltzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. And that's startling that some districts have a 30% fund balance. Mine don't. And that's good to hear that some school districts are in that particular shape. So thank you very much.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and other presenters for giving us all this good information. My question has to do with the breakfast program and extending it. And I've heard from a number of my constituents who work in the breakfast and lunch program, including 3 that actually sat in my office earlier today. And they said the program is struggling because of federal mandates that are unfunded, specifically when they're required to give out, students have to take their fruits and vegetables, even if they're not going to eat them. It adds a lot of cost. So anyway, with a program that's currently struggling, how can we look at extending now breakfast pre-K through 3 for everyone? I'm all for taking care of our kids in poverty and targeting them for breakfast. We want our children to have breakfast. But how can we extend a program when we're currently struggling with the existing one is my question.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Bennett, we would hope to be able to work through some of those barriers that school districts are having now. One thing we were able to highlight several years ago when we did it at All Day K was this grab-and-go breakfast. And so students would come in, they get a bag, and then they grab what they want, and then they would go to class and eat it, and then put their scraps back in the bag and then throw them away. So we could offer training and supports to those school districts that would need it and how to manage the breakfast program. As far as the federal requirements go, we can continue to work with our federal partners and on the nutritional standards and guidelines that they have that may or may not put in barriers. I haven't heard that that complaint from my nutrition workers. So I think that some school districts are working around, and maybe it's a matter of us getting out some strategies to all the districts to make sure they know how to do a breakfast program and get a lot of participation. It was interesting when the Bemidji folks were here just the other day. I had a high school principal talking about how beneficial it was, even though we're not recommending high school in this proposal. She was talking about their second chance breakfast that they have for their high school kids and how it's really increased the participation and some of the strategies they're using. So I think there's a lot we can learn from some of the schools that are effectively implementing the school breakfast and school lunch programs.
Representative Bennett.
Commissioner, again, but how can we're taking a bigger financial bite here. And I still, I understand we can increase participation, but we're taking pre-K through 3, everybody, not just targeting those who really need it. And I just still struggle with taking a bigger bite when we're not handling the bite that we've already taken. And I don't see how the grab and goes or whatever are going to address that funding issue that's currently there, and now we're going to add additional funding onto our schools and their breakfast programs and the lunch programs.
Commissioner, anything to add? Thank you. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, for the most part, this is additional funding for additional expansions or new initiatives, do we assume then that if something isn't mentioned, everything goes on as in the past or as is now in the budget?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, yes, the base would continue things that, for instance, literacy aid, we continue literacy aid the way that we've proposed it in the past. So all of the items that we have funded in the past would then continue in the base.
Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, can I assume then that for the most part, no. Madam Chair, Commissioner, tell me what will happen to school districts that are not in Q-Comp, that want to be in Q-Comp, but Q-Comp isn't mentioned here except for the alternative compensation for early ed.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, that's a really good question. We don't have Q-Comp in here, and we know that Q-Comp reform is probably something that is a very important issue to look at in terms of our teacher development evaluation. Half of our districts are getting Q-Comp, half are not, and we have reached our cap on Q-Comp. So we have reached the 75 million year cap, and so we do not have the capacity in which to put new districts into Q-Comp. So
Representative
those
Murphy.
who are in it now will grandfather into the program.
But, Madam
Representative.
Chair, Commissioner, but those who aren't in it, tough luck?
Commissioner.
Or do we have, Madam Chair, do we have to make amendments to 844 then? Or do we have to make changes to the present laws
Commissioner.
to get a pot of money, additional new money for Q-Comp?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Murphy, there are two ways to have additional funding for Q-Comp. One is to appropriate new money, or the other is to remove the cap. Those are the only two additional ways that we could put new school districts into the Q-Comp program.
And Madam Chair, Commissioner, do you have a preference?
Well, it's not presented in this budget bill right now, that we, in the governor's recommendations. These are our priorities with the amount of dollars that they're available now. And so we do have some school districts who have applied to Q-Comp who would like to get in. For instance, Rochester has an application that's been approved, but they chose not to get into the program unless it could be fully funded. So they are waiting for the funding or the lifting of the cap. At this point, I think it's just further discussion and up for debate on where those dollars would come from.
Representative Murphy.
Madam Chair, I think I have another two questions, but I will wait because maybe someone else has better ones first.
You would like me to come back to you?
Maybe?
All right. We will do that. Welcome. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Murphy, I'd always be willing to yield to you. So if you think of a question while I'm asking my array of questions, please interrupt me. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, it's good to see you as usual. I just want to express a concern, first of all, about school readiness and the fact that many of our rural schools do like that program because it targets. And with removing the funding from school readiness and putting it into the pre-K, I think you're going to find that there are going to be districts that have consternation over that change. So just want you to think about that as we move through the session and toward a conference committee. Madam Chair, I have a couple of more questions,
Yes.
if you might indulge me. Commissioner, on the preschool program, it would be in Section 3, with the increase in staff needed, how many teachers have you projected will need as it ramps up if this were to become law through 2020? Because by 2020, 100% of these have to be licensed or have special permission. And I know with the discussions we've been having about licensure, this raises some questions for me and some concerns. So,
Commissioner.
and we have an expert there, so thank you.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, I'm going to ask Bobby to respond to see if we've looked at the actual licensing and growing of license over to 2020.
Okay, Ms. Burnham, if you'd introduce yourself, and then please feel free to answer the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, my name's Bobby Burnham. I'm the Director of Early Learning Services at the Department of Ed. And that's a really good question and an excellent point to bring up. We are looking into the workforce development challenges that this may present. We are working with our license division right now to run those numbers and to get an accurate count of how many licensed early childhood teachers we currently have in the state and where they are. And then we will move forward to make some predictions on what the need might be in certain regions.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Back to the Commissioner, in Article 2, Section 1, who's going to make the determination of where to place the AmeriCorps members? Because you want them to be in focus or priority schools or those that have the improvement grants. Who's going to make that determination?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, I believe that the Reading Corps would make those determinations, and we put out our list every fall with the schools, and we've actually worked really closely with the Reading Corps on already prioritizing into those schools. And so we've just asked that they continue to prioritize, and then with the evaluation and research that they've just recently given, that prioritization will happen in grades, kindergarten and first grade.
And Madam Chair, one last question, thank you. And this is more or less a comment, Commissioner, from some of my school districts and others who've come to visit me from other school districts than my own. The kindergartners or those who eat breakfast in school, especially the kindergartners in first grade, are eating at about 8:30, but then they're served lunch at like 10:30. And those little ones are not quite ready to have a meal again that early. And so I'm hearing from food service that there's a lot of waste. And, I don't, what can we do about that? I don't know. But what a shame that we are funding this, and yet teachers and food service and others are telling me these little ones just aren't ready to eat, and yet schools have to have that schedule for them to eat at that hour. So please think about that as we go forward, because we may be throwing away more than we are allowing for our children to eat, and maybe we can do something a little different. But I do have a grave concern about that, and hope that you'll consider that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. And let's see, Representative Wills.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and Mr. Rooney, for the presentation. And I had several questions. I'll try to keep it concise, but it kind of stems off of Representative Seltzer's question about the pre-kindergarten program. And I'm just trying to understand how it works, how the funding would work. You mentioned, Commissioner, that some districts right now are charging a fee to parents to be able to provide a pre-kindergarten program to students. And I'm wondering if this bill became law, would they still be able to charge a fee to try to make up that other half of the funding, or would they not be allowed to and have to find the sources elsewhere? And I have a few other questions after that.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Wills, we are asking school districts to pick up the cost and not charge a fee.
Representative Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that was my concern, Commissioner Casilius, because if they're not able to use that as a source of funding anymore, they're going to have to look to other sources where they're already fairly strapped and using those dollars elsewhere. And on the flip side of it, I was curious if a district decides not to participate in the universal pre-kindergarten program. They're currently getting school readiness aid, but if that stream of funding is being, well, you could either say eliminated or rolled into the universal pre-kindergarten funding, if they opt to not participate in the program, do they lose that stream of funding?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Wills, we would be repurposing that school readiness aid for pre-K, so they would be incented to do a pre-K program to start it. Most of them are offering some semblance of a pre-K program now, so this would be additional funding for most of the schools that are in school readiness programs now and offering pre-K.
Representative Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for explaining that, Commissioner. 'Cause it seems to me, as you're looking at it, you're kind of, as a district, caught between a rock and a hard place. If you offer the program, you lose potentially funding that you maybe already have through parental fees, but you don't get the full amount to be able to implement the program. And if you choose not to, you lose the funding you have already that you're using for programs that you're currently putting on. So I don't know how this is a workable program, given those restrictions. But I also did have a couple questions on the breakfast and lunch program, if that's
Representative
all
Wells.
right. And I just spoke with several folks from my district this morning about the programs who work in the lunch program, and understanding how it's affecting my district, District 196, which is the 4th largest district in the state. And they said with the breakfast being provided for the all-day kindergarten that just started in the last year, they saw initially about 2,000 students participating, and then it dropped off to about 500 students participating, because in our district, most students come to school having already had breakfast, and they don't need a second breakfast and then a quick turnaround for lunch. So that was a concern that they brought up, and they've even had to change the bus route time schedule to try to get students there to accommodate for getting everyone through for breakfast, and so they're losing out on time to give them the instruction that they need in their classrooms. And so those are just some concerns that I see in broadening it even further. And then for the school lunch program, I understand the concerns with the federal requirements, and that's why I've chosen to author a bill to increase the funding for the lunch program for that reimbursement amount to cover that cost. And I feel like we'd be stretching ourselves too thin to provide funding for both programs when the need is more to focus on the lunch needs right there, as far as making sure that we're meeting those federal requirements. And I was just wondering, on the program itself, do you see or envision maybe any way that we could make it more flexible, that the school districts would have an option to use funding for breakfast or lunch, depending on what their needs are, as opposed to keeping them separate? I'm just curious.
Commissioner.
Well, Madam Chair and Representative Wills, everything's up for discussion and amendment, and looking at how we could just do a better job of providing full tummies to our youngest kids. That's the goal, is that our children don't come to school hungry and go to their first class worrying more about their hungry tummy than concentrating and focusing on learning. So if there's better strategies, we're willing to entertain those better strategies and how we could better meet the needs of our kids. But with more kids coming in poverty and more kids coming who haven't had opportunity for breakfast or school lunch, this is becoming a greater concern for us in terms of closing those gaps and making sure kids have rich minds and they're ready to go.
Thank you. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, thanks for being here. I'm from outstate Minnesota, where I don't think many of our schools have that 30% fund balance. You mentioned some did. But I want to ask about the pre-K program as well, and really the partial funding that the governor's plan affords the program. And you said some schools will probably not choose to take part in it, and the wealthier districts may or might. Couldn't this in itself be argued that it could tend to exacerbate the achievement gap, where your wealthier districts jump on this program, but those who can't afford it, your poorer districts, can't. Could you comment on that, please?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair and Representative Anderson, because we have some additional funding that comes for poverty, federal poverty aid through Title I programs, compensatory funding that comes for compensatory fund for poverty programs, integration funding that is now can be used for pre-K and for students who are in poverty. Wealthier districts don't get those additional revenue streams. And I think that those streams could be used creatively. I think that when we passed all-day kindergarten, we had 50% of school districts that were already providing all-day kindergarten. Many of those now have chosen to invest those savings from the state and putting those into starting pre-K programs, either 2 or 3 days. They're not doing full days. So we think that those districts that are ready would be able to begin to expand out their 4-year-old programs. And I also want to continue to stress that this is a growing challenge to the achievement gap, is getting kids ready for kindergarten. And we really need to start thinking about this additional grade, basically because our standards are so high. And we need to start thinking about every child, every 4-year-old having pre-kindergarten. Actually, Florida right now is considering mandatory pre-kindergarten, even though they've been having optional for many years. And so it's an important step in the right direction. I realize that it may advantage some districts who are more ready to be able to jump in this first, be an early adopter, so to speak. But we intend, and hopefully over future bienniums, to continue to build this pre-K grade to our K-12 system.
Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to thank you for coming here, Commissioner. I'm sure you'd rather be doing something else.
Oh, this is wonderful.
My question has to do with Representative Murphy's questions regarding the QComp program. I would sure like to know how it is QComp, which is available for a number of districts and not available for another number of districts, will relate to what we did last night in this committee with regard to House File 2 and the evaluation piece of that. And secondly, members, I would ask members to consider that at the time when QComp was developed and proposed here and passed into law, there were precious few dollars available for K-12 education, and a handful of districts seized on the opportunity simply to take advantage of one of the few new funding streams available to schools. Add to that dilemma the fact that we have now capped the funding, and the governor's recommendation is to basically continue the cap, continuing a situation where additional schools will not be able to get into QComp. Wouldn't it be just be better to take this funding stream and fold it into the formula and be done with it?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Anzos, I think by doing that, we would create winners and losers. We would disrupt school districts who have developed salary schedules and contracts around QComp and have negotiated agreements around those. It could become quite problematic. There's levies associated with that, where they've levied their property tax community for partial of parts of that funding. So it would become quite complicated to undo the program. Now, lifting the cap to get to Representative Murphy's question would be a cheaper option than trying to equalize across the entire state. I think we invest, what is it, 100 and, Tom, how much now is it? 180 million, I think? I think QComp 150, 180 million.
The aid part is about 75 and the levy's about 30.
Yep. So the aid part is 75 and the levy is about $30 million currently. So it's quite an investment over that's annual numbers, and so it's quite an investment over the biennium to completely equalize it. We'd be looking at nearly $200 million to equalize over the biennium for doubling essentially the QComp program. And there's very little evidence to show that it has much impact on student achievement at all. But it has been embedded within the processes of the teacher development and evaluation within districts. It required that there be salary compensation that was negotiated. So it's quite complicated in which to address, and quite expensive to address, to equalize the program as it stands. We had a task force that met and made some recommendations. I believe those have been forwarded to you and your committee members for consideration. The governor did not include it in his budget because we have prioritized other items in this budget for closing the achievement gap.
Representative Anzels.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Murphy, did you want me to circle back to you, or I have a couple more names on the list and I'll give you another chance?
Please, I'm learning more.
Very well. Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I appreciate the data and the information. I would make the suggestion that members and the department look at bundling into one group the funds for ECFE readiness, pre-K, et cetera, because those populations fluctuate a great deal in the districts, and that if you, I'm not asking, and they weren't asking, to have it extendable to outside this area, but if you allow the flexibility to implement with those funds what is needed for the students this year, and then next year, if there's a different mix, use those funds to implement to best help those students. So flexibility for the early age programs, the pre-K and readiness programs, I think would really allow these districts that are strapped, as was mentioned by another member earlier, to be able to address the actual students. Because we come up with programs that affect, and it's supposed to be fit here, fit there. Well, some students might do better with a slightly different program, and local devised programs where it's not a number, it's not even just the name, it's a face, it's a child. I think that flexibility would be good. And then this would be a question for the department with the getting rid of cut scores. What additional parameters and diagnostics and data are you looking at to monitor the quality coming out? We already have a look at taking remedial, but do we also have, are you going to look at additional things such as the acceptance rates to different tiers of colleges, progression from first year to second year, and the GPAs, because, you know, frankly, we do have tests we're giving, but if a student knows that they don't have a target, they may not try as hard, and the data we get off those tests might not be as accurate as it ought to be. And frankly, we should already be looking at the feedback of they're going on their career, and we had testimony of students that were top in their class, they got there, and they had to take remedial. Well, that's a problem. But if we're not preparing them broadly enough, and they're not progressing from the first year to the second year, they get discouraged. And we all know that it's important, a 4-year or 5-year graduation out of a standard college. So I'd like to understand what additional things you're bringing into bear to make sure we're doing the right things.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Quam, that's a lot, from E12 to higher ed. But I asked Tom to come down to just kind of talk about the flexibility that we passed in 2011 for school districts to move funds. And so I'd like for him to speak just briefly about that, because I think it's going to expire if we don't continue on to give school districts this flexibility for moving funds. And then I'll answer your higher ed questions about cut scores.
Mr. Melcher, would you please introduce yourself?
Madam Chair and Representative Quam, Tom Melcher with the Department of Education. There was legislation that does allow school districts to make fund transfers between accounts where there isn't any impact on the amount of state aid or property tax levies, and a number of school districts have used that authority to make transfers primarily within the general fund. That authority was first good for 2 years and then extended for another 2 years. I believe it expires at the end of the current school year. At the time that authority was adopted, we had fund balance penalties for school districts that had surplus fund balances in the early childhood, family ed, and school readiness areas, and so transfers were not allowed at that time, but those fund balance penalties have since been repealed. So to the extent that legislation is still on the books, you could make one-time transfers between accounts within the community service fund at this point in time. However, that, I believe, expires at the end of the 2014-2015 school year. So it's not ongoing authority, but there was the special legislation that I believe would allow for that authority to transfer, for example, between ECFE and school readiness during this current school year.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I understood and heard the phrases that school readiness funds, you were shifting that over to being, for the pre-K, which led me to believe that in discussions with approximately 3 dozen superintendents from southeastern Minnesota over the last few weeks, their interpretation is also that there's less flexibility, and they understand the concern or fear of moving something to the general. They just want to make sure that they have the flexibility to do what the kids need that are actually in their schools and in their programs. So either I didn't phrase the question right, or all those superintendents, and 100% I talked to, were of the opinion they didn't have the flexibility when it came between school readiness, pre-K, and the other proposals that are out there.
Mr.
Madam
Melcher.
Chair and Representative Quam, Tom Melcher with the Department of Education. I think the fund balance transfer information that I was talking about was through this current school year. The governor's proposal is 2017, which is 2 years down the road, and by then that transfer provision would not still be in effect unless the legislature were to extend it. And as I said, when the transfer provision was initiated, we did not allow transfers between the accounts within the community service fund because we did have a fund balance penalty if you were carrying more than a 25% fund balance in ECFE, let's say. We were reducing your school levy for ECFE, and so to transfer it to school readiness would have allowed the district to avoid the reduction in the levy, and so that would have been one of those transfers that would have been ruled out. But in the interim, that has changed. And I don't think that the word is necessarily out that has changed in recent years. So I think there may be what you're hearing may be that we've got maybe a disconnect between the timing when the law was passed and what the instructions were at that time, and then the subsequent repeal of the fund balance cap on those accounts.
Good. All right, Representative Markwart.
Madam Chair, I think you had one more question about higher ed.
I'm sorry. I was just looking at you. I was waiting for a nod, Representative Quam. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair, Representative Quam, thanks for your question with the higher ed. So we put in place in 2013 the world's best workforce in which to measure college and career readiness, high school graduation rates. We also have not removed cut scores. We do have cut scores on all of our state exams. However, we removed the requirement that we would deny a diploma based on a certain cut score. And we then place those requirements for students' scores by putting in place the ACT on higher ed. So there are admission requirements in higher ed for certain benchmarks and that you meet a certain score on the ACT in which to get into higher ed. But you're correct in that we've removed the requirement for a certain cut score to be made to ensure diploma, but we did also replace it with the ACT and the world's best workforce language and accountability around high school graduation by student group, as well as our college and career ready benchmarks on the ACT.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And having a cut score but not have it matter is a distinction without a difference. And I will offline try to find out the answer of what new ways are you monitoring the effectiveness, in college students. In other words, moving from the first grade to the second, acceptance at the different levels or tiers of colleges, because we want our students to be able to go where they want to go and be able to, and then, those other things I mentioned, but I'll cover that offline.
Madam Chair, just in Representative Quam, we do put out a report called the Getting Ready Report. We can make sure we get that to you and on remedial rates, and gone from 40% to 24% in the 2012 year.
Thank you. Representative Markwart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I think it's important that we're able to have a debate and a discussion about being able to put some good investments into our students, because Representative Van Zels was talking about times where we wouldn't be able to talk like this. But quite frankly, because of an improving economy due to hardworking employers and employees and the courage of the governor and legislature to raise revenues, we're able to talk about these things and be in a situation where we're looking ahead to a budget that's looking pretty good into the future. My question is, with a February forecast coming in about 9 days, and I think some anticipation that the little over $1 billion surplus could get a little better, Commissioner, can you share with us any important nuggets of anything that might go into education or anything that might be of discussions that you could share as far as if we do have a surplus, would there be additional investments in education?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Marquardt, as Commissioner of Education, I certainly would hope that there would be additional adjustments to the governor's budget. However, I have not had an opportunity to speak with him about the supplemental budget. We have a presentation that we will be making next week about the state of Indian education. That's a high priority for the governor. He asked me to convene this group, and I know that they're coming with some recommendations that would be up for consideration in terms of Indian education. I think that there are other priorities, that we've heard from our rural caucus around, and from the Senate around facilities, and we've heard other about teacher quality and supply that were even brought up today about teacher quality and supply and QComp. And there are a number of different items that are not prioritized yet in this budget because we had a limited amount of funding, and I suspect that if you look at the 7-point plan, you will see that the governor has said that he will continue to invest in education. It is a top priority of his every year that he's governor, and he's delivered on that promise, and I know that it will be a top priority of his. But there are other pressing matters as well. Transportation is another pressing matter, health and human services, our elderly, nursing homes, all the things that you read about in the paper. So it'll be up to the governor and this legislative body to make those decisions at the end of the day. And so I'm anxious to continue this dialogue with you and continue talking to you about the investments that we can make for our children in this great state and close the achievement gaps.
Madam Chair?
Representative Markwart.
Well, and thank you, Commissioner, and I just really, again, want to thank you and the governor for bringing forward a plan that really targets the areas that we know make the biggest difference in closing the achievement gap. So thank you again.
Representative Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Commissioner and Ms. Jeannie, thank you for your presentation. I would assume that by now you've already heard from school boards and from superintendents, and I know that we'll be hearing from AMSDE and SEE and all the other organizations regarding this budget. But what has been the reaction so far from our school boards and from superintendents in contact you?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Newton, they haven't really talked to me too much about the budget. I do know their platforms. I think they were interested in a larger increase on the per pupil, is what I'm hearing. You know, so I think that that's probably the biggest thing that I hear from my former colleagues. And that's the only feedback that I've really gotten on it. I do think that some of them would like to see the pre-K. It's kind of a split that I've heard about the pre-K. So some of them are ready and they're really excited to get going because they already have pre-K programs and they're very excited about it. And some are not as healthy on their fund balance and are worried about the same things you all are worried about. So but that's why we made it optional, and we plan on scaling so that when they are ready, they can take advantage of it when we're in a better financial position in which to do so. So we just think we need to get started because with nearly 40% of our students experience poverty, the solution can't just be for some kids, it has to be for all kids, and we can't afford to do it all at once, so we have to scale it over many, many years, just similarly to how we did all-day kindergarten. And then at some point, hopefully, our state will be in a fiscal place to be able to offer it 1.0 for every single kid in Minnesota.
Representative Newton.
Madam Chair, thank you, and Commissioner, thank you also. The runs that we have, were they prepared by MDE or by our staff by MDE? The question I have regarding the run, when we're looking at the anticipation of preschool students or pre-K students entering the schools, are the runs assuming that all of those students that we've identified will be in the schools, or are we looking at a figure like, as you've mentioned, 25% each year increasing? Perhaps Mr. Melcher can help with that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Madam Chair
Mr. Melcher.
and Representative Newton, there, we have two runs here. One is for fiscal 16, and of course that does not include the pre-K. I think it's pretty straightforward with the 1% on the formula, the English language learners and so forth. But I think the one that you're speaking of is the run for fiscal year 17. We do show toward the left-hand side maximum additional pre-K. So that's the number of 4-year-old children that we believe are in the school district that would be potential participants in the program. And then we're showing the various pieces over here, starting with the 1 and 1 on the formula, but toward the right-hand side in the second block of numbers from the right, what we have a column labeled added revenue change if district has pre-K. So what we're saying here is just to the left of that, we're saying this is the new money the school district would get if they don't offer pre-K. So it totals $127 million, averaging $151 per student, and you can see the amount for each school district. And then we thought what would be most useful for policymakers would be to see, in the event that the school district offered pre-K for all of their pre-K age students, how much revenue could they generate? So these are the maximum revenues that would be available to each school district. Now, some school districts might choose not to be in the program. Some school districts might target it. So you might have a school district that would say, we've got 4 elementaries and we're going to do it in the first year in this one elementary because we think that's where our greatest need is. And so what we tried to do here was just to establish kind of the outside limit on what the maximum revenue would be if the school districts all participated in the program to the fullest extent possible. So in terms of doing the budget document, what we've essentially assumed here is that we'll be at 50% of that level, and we don't have a run at this point. We can't identify which school districts will be in or out. All we can say is if the school district was considering it, they would probably want to see what kind of revenue they'd be looking at. So for example, in Minneapolis, if they did run the program for all of their schools, they'd be looking at $14 million, or in Okehennepin might be looking at $9 million. And so then we thought that might be useful for the number of students you see over here. And so we thought that might be useful information for policymakers and for school district leaders to say, gee, if we're in Minneapolis and we've got 38,000 kids that are in that, 3,154 that are in that age group, wrong column, can we run a program for, where we're planning to do a program for 3,100 kids, and we would generate $14.7 million. How could we make that work? So that was kind of what the goal is. Basically for state budgeting purposes, we're taking these numbers and dividing by 2 for the first year, assuming that statewide we'll have a 50% participation level, which would be a combination of some districts not doing it all, some districts doing it full bore, and some doing it partially.
Representative Newton.
Thank you.
Representative Mariani.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And excuse me, thank you, Commissioner, for being here and sharing the governor's proposal. I want to both praise but also challenge the governor on this. And so let me start out with the praise part first. It's pretty clear that our state over the years has developed some really, in my mind, has developed some really important tools. And a number of them are found inside this proposal, inside this budget, in terms of using them better, using them fuller, tying them to the general ed investments in a more smarter way. So better, fuller, and smarter. I think we need to stop and really appreciate the maturity of a serious, policy framework here that doesn't just simply say, look, we've got a few things here and there, and we're going to put some money here and some money there, and kind of make everybody happy, and we'll do the best that we can. That's not what I read in this proposal. I really read a very smart proposal. Obviously, pushing the boundaries around pre-K, as virtually all the social science, as well as the physical science, continues to inform us of the incredible power that exists for us as a people by investing more and more of our attention and resources in our youngest citizens. I think even if we were to do half of what we want to be able to do, we're all going to come out in a much smarter or a much powerful society a couple decades from now based on that kind of investment. The challenging part for me is that, and you're hearing little bit of the tension in the room, is that as we have these incredible tools that we want to use better and fuller, and we want to tie them into the general ed investments in a smarter way, there still is the issue of the basic general ed investment. And one thing that this legislature has struggled under various leadership for many, many years, and I've been here for most of those, has been to really keep pace with the actual expenses and costs that our schools and school districts run into just by virtue of economics and what the markets dictate. A couple of years ago, my caucus, under leadership of the gentleman to my left, came out of here with, in the first year, with a really strong statement on that, where we came out with a 2% and a 2%. And even that, quite frankly, wasn't going to catch us up to, the many, many lost years. However, I thought it was a really smart move on our part to be able to answer this very real issue that our school districts and our students face. It seems to me that if there's ever a time for us to go back to that bold investment posture, this is the time to do it, where we're economically in a very, quite frankly, advantageous and I think a position where many other states look to Minnesota and are a little bit envious about where we're at. And especially given the wisdom and the maturity that I think that's in this bill that says, you know what, it's not about either or. It is about better, fuller use of our existing tools and tying those more smartly to our general ed investments. So that's challenge number one, and it's, Madam Chair, it's a challenge to all of us here, I think. And then challenge number two is kind of a little bit more practical in terms of, kind of nuts and bolts things, which is I think we should continue to push ways in which we make these diverse investments in a manner where we're constantly evaluating their impact, where we're constantly holding them to a high accountability frame. I think the World's Best Workforce really helped us to do that. It really set the state framework from which, and not the federal framework, which God knows what's going to happen over there. But it really sets the state framework for us to be able to develop a really deep accountability set of relationships between all these tools, between our schools, and with one another as we make these appropriations. And so one of the challenges, and I would look forward to working with both the Majority Caucus and with you on this, would be for us to constantly push as we make these new, if we make these new investments, to be able to develop ever better evaluative mechanisms to judge. So Head Start, for instance. And I've been a longtime supporter of Head Start. But, this is a big investment that's being proposed in Head Start. I could totally get behind it. I can really get behind it if we're attaching a really strong evaluation framework to it, tied to our World's Best Workforce outcomes. And, quite frankly, like we did in World's Best Workforce, tying some strong accountability to it. So that if we're not hitting those targets, then perhaps we stop making those investments, or we change those investments and direct them in a different way. This is the only way for us to really move forward effectively and not just wishfully. And so just, challenge number two is to, for us to go back through these proposals, develop those strong evaluation, mindset around that, tools in which to do that. I suspect, quite frankly, it's going to require the department itself being able to have the capacity to do that kind of work, and hopefully do that in collaboration with others. Your administration, I think, has been very thoughtful about engaging lots of people over the last 4 years to bring forward a series of just great proposals that have developed into new policy directions for us. I want us to do that in terms of new finance investments as well. So, Madam Chair, I apologize for the lengthy, you know me by now. I'm not Mr. Concise, unfortunately, but I feel very strongly about what's on the table here. I think we have something really great to work with here. I want to challenge us to look at the general formula appropriations issue, and then also to constantly look at a much more powerful evaluative and accountability system based for all of these investments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Mariani. Commissioner, did you want to make a quick comment?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Mariani, you bring up a really good point in that, you know, our school districts are still trying to get whole. Those fund balances that I talked to have only spiked since 2009, when they were at a much lower fund balance then, but then with the new additional revenues they've gotten in the past 4 years, they're building back those reserves so that they can be in a sound fiscal position moving forward. Even with our investments over the past 4 years, we are still ranked 24th nationally. We want to deliver on a world-class education, but yet we are still funding our schools less than the national average, which is concerning. Also, I want to mention just quickly about the evaluation and accountability. I think this administration has put in more accountability than we ever have had before in our schools. Matter of fact, I was just on the phone today calling superintendents, reminding them to get in their summary for the world's best workforce. We have a handful of school districts that haven't done it, because I have that kind of relationship with my former colleagues as superintendents, to call them and say, look, we really want to get this in, because the rubber's going to hit the road in 2 years when they are going to be held accountable, and you have provided the authority in which to hold and set aside 2% of the district's general ed funding in which to more aggressively meet their goals that they set at their local level. So I think that it's really important that we align everything to the world's best workforce. So what we have been, you'll see in our policy bill and also in this budget bill, is that we try to embed everything into the world's best workforce. Teacher evaluation, integration before had zero accountability, it now has accountability and evaluation linked to it. Preschool readiness, we have kindergarten assessments that we're working on so that we can look at how well our programs are. The scholarships comparing to the school-based care or center-based care or private care, and what's the best way is three-star rated better than 4-star rated. So we're looking at those qualities in our kindergarten readiness, and that's tied strictly to the world's best workforce. So school districts are responsible for world's best workforce. We're responsible for higher ed remediation rates through our Getting Prepared report, through our high school graduation, through our college and career readiness standard on the ACT. And so we have been looking at new reporting, new ways of getting data out to schools so that they can use this in their continuous improvement and their locally developed plans and targets that they set for each other. Matter of fact, every year for the past several years, I have been sending out a report to school districts that show them exactly what their targets are to close the achievement gap by 50% by 2017. This is a publicly reported document that goes out. It shares with them what their target is. It shares with them how well they're doing toward their target and how many kids they need to move to proficiency. We also will be releasing our graduation rates again next week. And we give that list out to all our high school principals and all of our district superintendents, and they can see where they are comparatively to all the other districts and schools within the state in terms of meeting their targets and moving students across the stage with and earning their diploma. So we have been providing this data. It's publicly available. It's on our website. We have been giving it to superintendents and high school principals so that they could see where they're at in these goals. And I just really believe, Representative Mariani, that we are holding our schools accountable. They feel it, and they want to do better and have the resources in order to meet these really high expectations we have for them.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Representative Dabney, I have you on the list, and then I have two people who had wanted to testify the first time we heard on the governor's budget, and they couldn't be here, and I've let them know if time allows, today's another crack. So I'm just going to lay that out there that I would really like to give them an opportunity if we can keep it brief.
So no pressure, is that the message?
Precisely.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, welcome. I very much appreciate the proposal around universal pre-K. And I just need to understand better how you have it structured with the flexibility that you've given districts there to work with community providers, Head Start, whomever in the community. Is it either or? Could a school district provide it in some schools and also contract out with community providers at the same time? Can you just help me better understand that?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't mention that. If a school district, for instance, when Tom gives you the runs and you have a small school district, let's say we have a district here, I'm trying to find a smaller one, Sleepy Eye has 38 kids. And let's say that they're just not in a place, but they have $206,000 that they're able to get to run a program. It could be that they might be able to work with the local Head Start to develop that program. They could contract for educational services just like they can now. The local school board can enter into educational contracts with educational institutions to offer services. So we did build in that flexibility in which they would have to do that. Now, whoever they did would still have to be parent-aware rated. So we would still tie that to high quality. So whoever they decided to provide those services would still need to be entered in with our parent-aware program.
Representative Dabney.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, thank you. I'm hoping that that also speaks to districts' ability to find culturally competent providers for universal pre-K that might better respond to parent preference as to where their child gets that experience. I do want to go make another connection and better understand. PBIS, I'm more and more convinced of the importance of preventative efforts in schools, and also recognize that currently there's some number of kids coming into kindergarten, many who have not had the pre-K experience, who don't know how to act. Some of them because they didn't have the pre-K experience, some of it because of early behavioral issues that haven't been recognized or responded to. Is there a connection? Is the PBIS model valid with this young a child, as we're talking about here? Is there an interaction, a potential interaction there to reduce suspensions or eliminate suspensions of those early years in particular?
Madam Chair, Representative Dabney, PBIS is something I'm extremely passionate about. I worked in Memphis City Schools where they still had corporal punishment and was responsible for what they called then the Blue Ribbon Plan for ending corporal punishment in a 122,000 student district. And had 76% poverty at the time. So it was very challenging, and we implemented PBIS district-wide, and it made a huge difference, and we were able to cut suspensions by 50%. And so I actually, during that time, it was 2005, I came up and spoke with Alice about it and what we were doing, because we had the relationship there with Carol Johnson. But it does actually have the impact to make a difference for preschool kids too, you know, if it's within the school environment or if they're implementing the practices, because PBIS is about people, practices, and then looking at your data and the interaction of those three things, and then putting in place interventions, a tiered intervention program to be able to provide supports to students at the different levels. And it increasingly gives you more support to kids who are, for instance, acting out, and you provide more support to those students than you would to the general population. But the wonderful thing about PBIS is it gets all the adults on the same page around discipline and around rules and school culture, and it builds strong school cultures, and everybody feels very supported in those schools and knows how to get support that they need in the classroom. So it's just such a positive school culture piece. I mean, you probably have gone into schools and you hear Titan pride or patriot, you know, and that word spells out, you know, respect and, you know, manners or whatever it is, you know, so tiger pride and things. So it's just a really great way to kind of rally everyone about being positive and treating each other with respect. I think Bobby wants to speak just quickly about your other concern with the contracting of services.
Ms. Burnham.
Madam Chair, Representative, we actually, you know, have a early learning version of PBIS as a statewide model as well. It's called the TAXI model, and it is a tiered intervention model as well that is implemented through the unit in our division from early childhood special ed. And it's a very successful, strong model that's based on teacher training and professional development, and making sure that educators have the training and the skills necessary to deal with the early learners through 3 and 4-year-olds to get them prepared to go into kindergarten, both not only academically, but emotionally and behaviorally as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner, thanks especially for the Tiger Pride shout-out. Good move.
All right, Representative Murphy, did you have any additional questions?
Madam Chair, are you still going to have people?
I would still like to give the testifiers a few minutes.
I'll wait.
All right, thank you. All right, so with that, Representative Murphy, would you have questions to come back to the Commissioner or Mr. Uni?
No, I can talk to Mr. Uni afterwards for what I want. I want something from his agency.
Very well, Representative Murphy, I will leave that in your capable hands. And Commissioner, Mr. Uni, and to your, Ms. Burnham, your entire team, Mr. Melcher, you were up too. We appreciate very much your being here and all the time you've spent with the committee today, so thank you. And I would, now I'm going to ask, again, 2 testifiers we had when we first had a hearing on the governor's budget were not able to be with us, and we also ran short of time that day. So with the committee's indulgence, and I will ask each of you to keep your remarks to about 2.5 minutes if you could. But gentleman from Hunger Solutions and also representative from Council on Black Minnesotans, if you wanted to come down to the testifiers table.
Madam Chair, while they're coming down.
Yes, Representative Murphy.
What is your intent on 847? Do you want other authors?
Oh, on 844, Representative
Or
Murphy?
844?
If you would wish, I would be happy to entertain additional authors.
Are you going to use this as a vehicle, or are you going to attach some of these good ideas that we all support onto something else? Or is that not decided yet?
I think not determined yet, Representative Murphy.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, welcome. Please state your name for the record, and if you can give us the highlights in a couple of minutes. I apologize, we've run late today, but we would welcome your comments.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Peter Whitesock. I'm a community organizer with Hunger Solutions Minnesota, and just want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the governor's proposal to expand free school breakfast to more low-income Minnesotans. Hunger in Minnesota is still a growing concern. Even with our improved economy, many Minnesotans still work at jobs that keep them at poverty levels. We have 1 in 5 families now with children that is food insecure in Minnesota. And so a lot of these families that are struggling to rely on programs like our network of 300 food shelves throughout the state and government nutrition programs like SNAP and school meals to keep their families nourished. And so hunger means that parents and their children are skipping meals, that food is inexpensive but low in nutrition, and children are going to school on an empty stomach. Many students don't have access to meals over the weekends, snow days, or any out-of-school times. And so every day, through our Minnesota Helpline, operators answer the phone. We hear directly from a lot of stressed parents that worry about how to afford the 3 meals a day on the table. A lot of these are single parents, they're married parents, they're parents of disabled children and educated parents. And so these calls come from every county throughout the state. And we also hear many reports from our network of food shelf partners, the surge in the summer months to address child hunger. Summertime is a challenging time for many parents and for our food shelves because of the school meals not being available during that time. And so many programs struggle to keep enough food on these shelves during these summer months. Some have started school backpack programs, special fundraising to keep food shelves stocked during this time. And so our school breakfast program is an important hunger fighting tool that is utilized, according to the newest report by our National Food Research Action Center. Minnesota schools are ranked 31 out of 50 when it comes to serving breakfast to low-income students. 48 low-income children in Minnesota ate school breakfast for every 100 that received free or reduced price lunch during the 2013-2014 school year. So we have a lot of room to improve compared to the national average, but Minnesota is currently below the average, but we have and applaud the Governor Mark Dayton's proposal to include $28 million to the fund to fund universal free school breakfast for grades pre-K through 3rd grade in his 2015 budget. There's so many benefits to children when they eat breakfast at school. Poverty and the achievement gap are occurring over all regions throughout the state, and school breakfast is especially important in rural districts. Many rural children get on the bus early in the morning for long rides to school with little time for breakfast. According to the University of Minnesota, research and interviews with school principals and teachers, when students eat breakfast at school, they see better test scores, better health outcomes, less disruption in classrooms, better attendance. In other words, nourished children are better, more productive students.
Mr. Wojcik, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Sure thing. We can and must fix the hunger gap for children. Breakfast is ready and waiting hunger relief tool that can be expanded in Minnesota along with SNAP and school nutrition. It's a robust program that's proven to be effective, and we wholeheartedly support the governor's proposal to increase breakfast to another 83,000 students. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Welcome. Would you please join us at the testifier table?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Benjamin Mackay. I am the Education Committee Chair for the State Council on Black Minnesotans. And I sit before you and your esteemed colleagues this afternoon because the council wishes to speak on behalf of the value of early childhood education and expressing support for the governor's budget proposal in that regard. As everybody knows, education is a powerful entity. It shapes the lives of anyone who has full access to education in this state and any other state in the union. With that, I want to point out a couple of things. Less than 42% of the African descendant households in the state of Minnesota are homeowners. And with the current employment rate at about 4.9% for white Minnesotans, it's at over 11% for black Minnesotans. Education, again, is a powerful entity, and early childhood education is a great table setter for all children to succeed in the state of Minnesota. Now, I could go on for specifics, but most of the numbers and most of the human faces on education as it is related to people of color in this state have been talked about this afternoon. I merely wanted to let this committee know that the State Council on Black Minnesotans, which is one of the more transparent councils of color in the state, has traveled the state for the last year supporting communities of color in Duluth, Mankato, St. Cloud, and Rochester, and all points in between. Those communities have told us on more than one occasion that their concerns are in parallel with the governor's budget proposal on early childhood education in particular. And we wanted to say that we are supporting that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you sitting through the hearing and being here to offer your testimony. Did we get your name? Could you spell your last name for me? I don't think I got it correct.
First name is Benjamin, like Banneker. Last name is spelled M-C-H-I-E.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. And with that, we've run a little over, so I thank the committee, and we are adjourned.